Good evening. Welcome to the October 7th, 2024 meeting of the Grafton Planning Board. How did it get to be October? Anyway, I would call the roll of the members since we have someone participating remotely. Justin Wood,
Present.
Bob Hassinger,
I'm here.
Prabhu Venkatraman,
Present.
and our associate member Greg Dalamole, who has been appointed to be a regular member but has not yet had the opportunity to be sworn in. So technically for this evening, he remains an associate.
Present.
And Dave Robbins is present, obviously. And staff present would be Fiona, the town planner, Fiona Coughlin,
Present.
and assistant planner Natalia Allward.
Present.
All righty, all present and accounted for. We will begin with our usual agenda. The first item being public input. If there is anyone here wishing to comment or speak to a matter that is not otherwise on the agenda, now would be the time to raise your hand either on Zoom or in the room. Seeing none. We'll move to our action item agenda, the first of which is election of a clerk to replace our departed member who was serving as clerk, also to designate a delegate to CMRPC and a delegate to the Economic Development Commission. All three positions were held by our former member. And while Greg is technically not yet a member of the board, seeing as how he has been appointed and we have every reason to expect that he will be sworn in, Greg can be a candidate for any or all of these positions. So, first, clerk. Who wants to volunteer to be clerk?
I think it's the tradition, right, that the new person
It's
is
usually
clerk.
the tradition,
So
but
I will volunteer.
we've made
If
exceptions.
y'all want to make motions and vote
I
on
move that we appoint Greg as clerk.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion to the motion? Hearing none. Mr. Wood,
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger,
Aye.
Mr. Venkatraman,
Aye.
and Mr. Robbins votes aye. Motion carried unanimously. Congratulations, Clerk Dalamole. Next, a delegate to CMRPC. Bob is our primary delegate to the CMRPC, but another board member.
Actually, my position is the one, every town has to have a planning board member as a delegate. Where we get an extra delegates, they just have to be eligible. They don't have to be members of the boards, but it often comes
Correct.
out that way. And anyone puts their hand up.
So, would any other board member care to serve as a delegate to CMRPC?
If Greg does not want to, I'll take it, but I
think it's yours.
sure.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded that Justin Wood be the board's second CMRPC delegate. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Mr. Wood,
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger,
Aye.
Mr. Venkatraman,
Aye.
and Mr. Robbins votes aye. Motion carried unanimously.
Yeah, Fiona or whomever. Let's be really sure that CMRPC gets the appointment. There's been a little fuzziness. Okay?
Yes, absolutely. I'll do that.
Good.
And finally, someone who would like to represent the planning board on the Economic Development Commission.
What do they decide?
I don't remember the charge offhand.
Let's just see if perchance we can refresh our memories on the Economic Development Commission.
Mr. Chair, if I may,
Yes, please do.
the website is needs some updating. But is the question just what the role would be of the representative?
Yeah, well, here, although I had to click through a couple times to get to it. The mission of the Economic Development Commission is to promote sustainable economic development and to assist the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board in the implementation of the town's economic goals and objectives. There are currently 6 members on the board. I don't remember what the anyway, the planning board has a slot on that Economic Development Commission.
Yeah. I think that I am doing as many things as I should be trying to do. I'm on 3 town bodies, and I'm on, the delegate to CMRPC, and I'm on 3 committees up there. The executive committee, the transportation, and the physical development
Yes,
committees.
yeah.
So, even with Zoom,
Yeah, and somewhat similarly, I have,
Yeah,
I
you have about 40.
occupy enough things already.
you have what, 40, 35?
So if no one wants to take that position right at the moment, we can leave it unfilled. But Prabhu, would you be interested in EDC?
I was on it earlier, but not at this moment.
Okay.
Dave.
And it does have to be a member, yeah, it has to be a member of the board.
Yeah, it's,
Well, let's wait and see. I wonder if it could be, an associate.
it probably could be.
So,
So we
let's table this
yeah,
till the
since-
next meeting,
since
or,
there's a notable lack of enthusiasm right at the moment, but we are expecting to acquire an associate member within a month. So we can leave it open until then. All right, so that takes care of our first action item. Next action item is to approve the 2025 Planning Board meeting schedule.
the only thing on that schedule that I wasn't sure whether, why we had to know that November 11th was a holiday. And I can see the May 26th, because that would have been a normal meeting day.
Yes,
But, in any case,
yes,
I move we approve.
I'll second.
moved and seconded that we approve the proposed 2025 meeting schedule. Any discussion of the motion? I suppose November 11th gets on there because sometimes it falls on a Monday. But not next year.
Yes, that is why it's on there. Thank you.
All right, with no further discussion of the motion, Mr. Wood,
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger,
Aye.
Mr. Venkatraman,
Aye.
and Mr. Robbins votes aye. Motion carried unanimously. We now have our next year's meeting schedule.
Now, we also are supposed to do this, aren't we? Are we supposed to approve the, submission schedule?
No, not really, just that it relies on the meeting schedule. So once you approve the meeting schedule, we're all set.
Cause I'd like to see us actually stick by it. There'd be a chance to know what's coming up before the meeting. If, submissions were done on that schedule. So.
We do try to make them stick to
Yeah,
that.
well, it either is or it isn't. Draft decision.
All right, our last action item is the draft decision for the scenic road permit at 103 George Hill Road. My review, I noted a couple things I'll note. First off, we don't need to include the statement designating the associate member to vote, because the associate member doesn't have a vote on the scenic road permit. If Greg had succeeded in getting appointed as a regular board member, of course, he would have been eligible to vote. but as he is technically not, the decision should reflect that. A real minor, let's see. Not sure. Since Greg hasn't been sworn in yet, this statement may not even need to be there, but Greg didn't run for the vacancy, he applied for it. Just a real nitpicky wording. The joint meeting to appoint Greg was October 1st. It wasn't a hearing and it wasn't October 2nd. Let me back up here a minute. I should actually have it in front of me to read. I had something on finding 3. Yeah, finding 3, it just looks like it's missing a word. During the public hearing, the word should be like noted or acknowledged the need for a break in the stone wall. It says the board the need for the break in the stone wall, so I think there's just a word missing there. Finding 10, sight lines is spelled S-I-G-H-T. Should be spelled S-I-G-H-T, I should say. Finding 10, the
Oh.
town
Oh,
planner
yes.
confirmed sight lines will remain clear. It's just
Spelling's not
you-
my,
I just,
I'm an engineer.
I recommend the appropriate spelling of sight there. Finding 12, it just occurred to me to say that the Macris is referenced here. For people who know what it is, it's not ambiguous, but acronyms typically ought to be spelled out. In this case, it might be better described rather than Macris as the Mass Historic Commission Inventory of Historic Assets.
You know, if it's only used once, that way, if it's used more than once, you put the acronym and then you use it.
Yes. So you either spell it out, or in this case here, it's sufficient just, to describe it in terms that are more easily understood. And I was going to recommend that in the record of vote that Greg not be identified as an associate member, but since as the associate tonight Greg is not eligible to vote, he'll just be left off entirely.
Yeah.
So that's what I had on the draft decision. Anybody else?
Well, I was just going back through the exhibits. We did look at Exhibit 7, which was the letter from George at 104 George Hill Road during the hearing.
Yes, we did.
Yeah,
read it.
because
and
I was
speak to
reading
briefly.
it, and if the location was to the left of what they were showing, it would help. If that, I don't understand that, because the entrance, I think, is on the right-hand edge of the property, the downhill side. And the left-hand edge would be uphill, up above 104. So I would think that the water problem would be more for them. But in any case, I didn't understand. We have what we have.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I may, I'm happy to, correct the wording of that, if, to clarify, because I was
No.
trying to keep it as close to what the testimony was from the couple. But yeah, I'm happy to make those changes that Bob's suggesting. And
Well, the left was in the exhibit, and I don't understand why they were saying that, because it doesn't fit the geography. But
Yeah.
so it's not. I don't know about what's in the decision. It's just that I don't understand.
Anyway, I'll move that we approve the decision with all the relevant findings and exhibits, etc., with the modifications that Mr. Robbins has suggested. Anything further from the board?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion of the motion? Hearing none. Mr. Wood,
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger,
Aye.
Mr. Venkatraman,
Aye.
and Mr. Robbins votes aye. Motion carried unanimously. Staff will prepare all the final paperwork and run it through whatever needs to be done.
I move that we authorize payment of the bills.
Second.
Moved and seconded that we authorize payment of the bills. Any discussion of the motion? Hearing none. Mr. Wood,
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger,
Aye.
Mr. Venkatraman,
Aye.
and Mr. Robbins votes aye. Motion carried unanimously. We can pay the bills. Next, we have minutes of previous meetings. We actually have two previous meeting minutes to approve this evening, September 23rd, 2024 and May 20th, 2024.
I move we approve both of those minutes.
Yeah, as drafted with the latest drafts, because they've gone through a couple of
Yes.
rounds of revision, but the motion is for the latest drafts. Is there a second?
Second.
Yeah, moved and second. Any discussion on the minutes of either of these two, September 23rd or May 20th?
Nothing caught my eye.
With no discussion, Mr. Wood,
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger,
Aye.
Mr. Venkatraman,
Aye.
Mr. Robbins votes aye. Motion carried unanimously. The minutes are approved. Staff report.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have been focusing more, and I think the board will know this, that it's been how busy it's been. We've been really focusing on application processing, hearings, decision writing, and kind of the day-to-day administrative work more than the kind of larger scale, long range additional projects. But we have been very busy. It's a great thing. Happy to see the ability to issue decisions in a timely manner. I have been working with Graves Engineering, doing construction compliance and monitoring. We have also been dealing with a high level of Freedom of Information Act requests. So we've been, Natalia and myself are working together to get to respond to those requests. I have closed out the last tasks prior to town meeting. I met with FinCom last week. I also met with the I met with the select board the night before. So that all of our one town meeting article and all of the associated paperwork, that's all set, and we are good to go. We had a master plan working group meeting on the 30th. I'm doing some follow up for that, reviewing the housing and land use chapters and adding my comments as well as the other working group members before we convene again in November. We had our wayfinding and branding designs approved at the select board meeting last week, which was great to close that project out. Now we will just be anticipating the final report from the consultant, which basically summarizes our process. And something very cool that I didn't get a chance to mention at the select board meeting is that we actually will, at the Southern New England Planning Conference in early November, I will be presenting that project as part of a wayfinding and signage session. So with alongside the town of Acton. So I'm very excited to talk about that process and the work that the advisory group did. And I thank the advisory group for all of their help in getting it over the finish line. And I think other than that, we have our ADU project page up right now. It really is more of an information clearinghouse. It's just a place where we're gathering information and we're doing, updates with, in real time with the housing bond bill. We have to kind of continue to talk about this at every meeting because I know that folks are very curious. We've had people coming to the window asking questions. We're looping in the Affordable Housing Trust, and we're just trying to be as transparent and with folks and let them know what is coming. So check out that project page if you have time. And yeah, I think everything is moving along in a good direction. It's just been a lot more of the administrative day-to-day things that we've been focusing on because it's just been quite busy. But now I'll be able to refocus more on the longer range planning projects probably at the end of October. So happy to answer any questions that the board has, or if you want to ask me about something in particular.
Anything?
If,
Questions,
if
comments?
if town meeting's in 2 weeks, then we're not having this meeting. Will we skip or what's
Right,
our schedule?
our next meeting is the 28th.
Okay, great.
Yeah. And the town meeting's the 21st.
But we often sort of gather together and, sit together at town meeting.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, there have been occasions when the board has needed to have an actual meeting just before town meeting. But it's been a few years since we've had to do that, but that does happen on occasion.
I think we did it last year for something real quick. Remember with the ZBA and
Yeah, I think there was a warrant article that we had that we discussed.
but yeah, we don't have to do it this year.
No, not likely to need our meeting just before town meeting this year. All right, anything else for Fiona? Anything in the correspondence catch anybody's eye?
There's some interesting correspondence that's in the document about the ADU bylaw the state law the state passed, but we'll get to that at a future meeting.
Soon enough.
Yes.
We'll be dealing with that eventually. All righty, we have a public hearing continuation, which we advertised, or which we voted to continue to 7:30, so we kind of have to wait till 7:30 to start that. Do we have any reports from planning board representatives on town committees and CMRPC? I have nothing interesting coming out of CMRPC, Bob?
Nothing I need to bring here.
All righty.
Usually the interesting stuff comes by email from up there, and Natalia generally shares it with us.
Any Route 20 corridor news that you know of from CMRPC side?
Which part of it? You're talking about from Northborough to Shrewsbury?
Yeah, roughly.
They're working on it. They're looking for money. This project keeps getting bigger. Same as every project.
Yes.
They're looking to put I think it's a roundabout at, what's it called? Is it called South Street? As you come up the hill from Northborough, there's the road that comes this way. And it's not signalized, and it's the site of considerable accidents. So I think they've been trying to find a solution to that. And I'm not sure whether that's settled, but of course, until they have the money in hand and the quotes, who knows?
Is that where South Street goes south off of Route 20?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't that become,
So the other South Street Route 20 is South Street on the north and it's Green Street on the south side.
Green Street?
South Street.
Whichever, it's part way up the hill.
Yeah, I think that's the South Street that's heads south.
It cuts over to Route 9. It cuts over to Route 9, right?
Oh, that's the other South.
Oh, okay.
There's two South Street intersections on Route 20. The one, it's a crossroads. It's South Street on the north side of Route 20, and it's Green Street on the south side. Green Street heads down to Pine Street here in Grafton.
Yeah.
But farther down the hill, towards Northborough, you've got the rest of South Street, which heads south and ends up in Westboro.
But anyway, it's a problem intersection.
I see Fiona's hand up.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to highlight while we're talking about CMRPC that I have been in talks with the Shrewsbury town planner and our representatives at CMRPC to set up, we're thinking monthly roundtable discussions with planners and other folks in the region, specifically about the ADU work that's forthcoming. So I forgot to mention that before. It's not finalized yet. We're still working out the logistics, but I'll make sure to keep the board up to date on that. And Bob, I also believe the quarterly meeting for CMRPC is coming up soon.
Well, they come up every quarter.
Yes, they do.
Let me,
I think it might be March. The next one is March 13th, 2025. But at that particular meeting, they do want to also talk about the housing bond bill as well. So lots of opportunities to discuss that topic. And I just wanted to reiterate that for the board while we were on that.
CMRPC's next. Oh, no, I don't have it. Okay. I don't have it handy.
Okay, I did pull it up on my laptop and I do see it March 13th at 2025 of 6 to 8 p.m. Location is to be determined. But it might be an interesting one for board members to attend if they want to learn more about the new law. So that's all. Thank you.
You know, there'll be a quarterly meeting before that, but you're saying that one is gonna talk about the law.
Yes.
Is that it? Okay. Because we just had a quarterly couple weeks ago. Well, I think that says 7:30.
We're about 2 minutes shy of 7:30. Is that close enough for everybody's comfort?
My sundial.
Alrighty, so I guess let us proceed with the continuation of the public hearing for the project at 12 Centennial Drive and several other addresses. So Fiona, is there anything you wanted to start with to bring us up to date? Otherwise, we'll give the applicant an opportunity to get this going.
Sure. Yeah, I can do a brief overview before turning it over to the applicant. So this evening, we are going to be focusing on sound and the exhibits that were uploaded into the record, Epsilon's sound study, as well as Noise Control Engineering's peer review reports. There wasn't anything of concern from my perspective. There was a couple of outstanding minor comments from Noise Control Engineering, but nothing that was any concern on their part either. So this is the last of the peer review processes, and at this moment we're not seeing anything outstanding, but I would like the applicant to kind of speak to that. And I think that the applicant also has a couple of other topics that they want to touch base on, including scheduling for the board. So I will let them take that.
Okay,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Donahue.
For the record, Mark Donahue from Fletcher Tilton on behalf of the applicant Prologis. With me this evening to answer any questions the board may have are John Perry and Hannah Schur of Langen Engineering, the design engineers for the project, Jonathan Scott of Prologis, the project manager, and Ryan Callahan from Epsilon, who has conducted the acoustic study. We've covered a fair amount of ground since we began this process in June, as Ms. Coughlin indicated. Things have gone very well from the applicant's viewpoint, and we hope it also has for the board. We've been waiting to do sound until we had all of the data and the report prepared. The report was submitted in mid-August. We'd have the benefit of your peer review consultant having reviewed it, issued a review letter, which Epsilon had a chance to reply, send that back, receive another reply back. So there's been a fair amount of work amongst the experts, which this is a particular area of importance that I find, at least, that experts become involved. What I'd like Mr. Callahan to do this evening, with your permission, is kind of review the methodology of the study. so you understand how it came about, the conclusions driven from it, from both stationary viewpoint of sound producers and transient producers, which are not governed by the sound standard, but are certainly relevant for the board's consideration, and demonstrate that really there's no anticipated impact to any of the surrounding property owners from the site. So with your permission, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, please,
Right.
please proceed. Well, I'm sure we're all interested in
Yes.
understanding what the sound study, how it was done, and what the results are.
Absolutely. I think we had a presentation that was prepared with a few slides. Is that being controlled on
Fiona,
your
can you
end?
put the slides on?
Yes, I will do that. One moment. Can you see my screen okay?
Your sound just got really soft, but yes, we can see your screen.
Okay,
Good.
thank you.
It sounds better.
Just let me know when you want me to forward onto the next slide.
Sure, you can go ahead. Thank you. Just real briefly about me, my name is Ryan Callahan. I work for Epsilon Associates. I'm an associate there. I've been a noise consultant for 18 years, completing community sound level assessments for projects much like this one and many others that produce all kinds of noises. I'm also a full member of the Institute of Noise Control Engineering, or INCE.
I didn't know there was such a thing, but I'm not surprised.
There is indeed. You can go to the next slide, please. So sort of the Cliff Notes version of our sound level assessment here. We conducted this sound level assessment in the spring and into early summer. The assessment included ambient sound level monitoring to establish the existing sound levels in the vicinity of the project, and then sound level modeling to predict future impacts from the project for both stationary sources, and by that I mean HVAC sources, rooftop equipment, ventilation, and also truck-related activities, mobile sources. The ambient monitoring and acoustic modeling results are then combined to predict potential sound level increases, and those are the values that are compared to the state noise policy, the Mass DEP noise policy. And as was mentioned, our study was peer reviewed. I believe the peer reviewer is also in attendance this evening if there's any questions for either of us. If you can go to the next slide, please. Just to touch on the regulations, the town of Grafton does not have quantitative sound level limits that would apply to the operations of the project. But the state does. The Mass DEP noise policy limits the increase of existing sound levels to 10 decibels or fewer. It also has limits for, prohibits a production of a pure tone or a tonal sound. And the way that the Mass DEP noise policy is evaluated is we must know what the existing sound levels are and what the potential impacts are, so we can calculate that increase. So if we go to the next slide, I just have a quick example of common sound levels, so we have a understanding of what types of sound levels we're talking about. I do have large printouts of this slide in case anyone is interested in looking at it, because I know it can be hard to see on the screen. But this just gives some sort of benchmarks of what typical sound levels are. For instance, in this room while I'm speaking, we're probably in the 60s. If I speak really loud, I can probably get into the low 70s there. All of the sound levels from the project that we've predicted, we're talking about levels in the 30s, 40s, and low 50s, just to put that into a little more context. If we go to the next slide. Thank you. So a little bit more about the ambient monitoring that was conducted. We placed microphones around the project area. We had long-term sound level meters and also short-term sound monitoring stations. The long-term meters were left out on site for a 1-week period, and they continuously logged sound levels on an hourly basis for that 7-day period. Then we collect those microphones, bring it back to our office, and reduce that data to data analysis, And what we're after are the ambient sound levels, which are L90s. The Mass DEP defines ambient as an L90 sound level. That is a statistic. It's a sound level metric. Essentially, it means the quietest 10% of a time period. So when you measure a 1 hour period, the L90 of that period are the quietest 6 minutes in that time period. So those are the values that we established through the ambient monitoring. And I see we're on the sound level modeling slide, so we're good. And then the sound modeling that was conducted, we use a 3-dimensional acoustic model where we essentially build the site as it's intended to be in the future. So we download terrain of the site and project area, and we put the proposed building in and all the sound sources. And that model is used to predict the project only sound levels. So the worst case sound levels that could occur from just the project. And that's what you see on the screen is the resulting sound contour figure. Those are sound isopleths showing what decibel levels would be expected from the project under a worst case basis, using very conservative assumptions that are inherent to the model, such as downwind propagation in all directions and favorable temperature and humidity. So we ask the model to be very conservative and then use that to predict a worst case scenario. And then those modeling results are added to the ambient sound levels that we measured. And if we go to the next slide, the conclusions of that study is that at all locations, the project is expected to comply with the Mass DEP noise policy. And again, the project has been peer reviewed, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the board may have. Thank you.
Just one, part of the modeling, as I recall from reading through the details, was you're modeling all the noise emitters, basically the HVAC units and fans on the roof. You're modeling those operating at maximum, producing
right.
the maximum noise output.
That's correct. I know, most HVAC equipment these days are on variable frequency drives where the fans, of course, don't just go to 100% at all times. They ramp up and down as needed. So our model doesn't attempt to take that into account. It just assumes that everything is running at full throttle at all times, which is very unlikely.
Yeah, but that's how you would want to model it for the purpose of assessing the maximum impact of the noise.
Yep. Yes.
Any questions, comments from the board? I mean, there's a lot of detail to read through if you guys want to, if you read through the whole report.
Where would the 12-foot wall be?
On the Shrewsbury side.
Right. So on one of the slides, if we can back up,
Yeah, that slide.
Oh, forward. There.
It's that
yeah,
red line.
There's a red line there. That
Okay.
intention of that wall is mainly to benefit the closest residences, which are actually in Shrewsbury in the northern part of the project, and that's to help shield some of the incidental sound sources from trucking activities at the location where the shortest distance from those activities to a residential area is proposed. That north side of the building also has the benefit of some natural terrain that's going to be existing in the future when the hillside is cut into. The middle part of that building will have a large natural berm, so that wall is kind of a continuation of that.
And that's why the wall is only in that one location.
That's correct.
As I recall, our peer reviewer asked the question.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the details of the documents that you submitted have a lot more detail.
Yes, we can go in as much detail as you like. We have I actually have some elevation views at the end of this slideshow as well, if you'd like to see what the sound wall will look like on a profile basis as well.
Go ahead.
Okay. I just somewhat, it's kind of broad questions. The Mass DEP regulation, where all does that apply, or where does it not apply within our world? Noise comes up occasionally, like not too far from your location. There was a thing that got to be quite a problem, and we had somebody going out with a sound meter and making measurements. But I wonder whether these rules would have actually applied there or in general. We've had other sound things here over the years.
It's a good question. The Mass DEP specifically would get involved in projects if that project was required to get an air permit. If they were emitting enough to require that, then the actual Mass DEP would get involved. But the Mass DEP noise policy, it applies at property lines, at residential property lines where people are sensitive to sound. They've granted waivers for industrial sources, industrial, abutting industrial, and that type.
Yeah, well, the first part of that is, I read that twice, but I'm not clear whether, when you say emitted into the air, this gets into air pollution. Is it just if they're emitting sound into the air, or is it like industry that emits stuff into the air other than sound?
So what types of sources are regulated? Is that
What kind of source do you have to have before their rule kicks in for sound?
well, they will regulate stationary sources of sound. So if you're putting in a large HVAC system,
But I'm thinking about if you want a special permit for a operation up along the road a ways away from here, and it makes a bunch of noise, and you come to us for a permit, and all they do is it's it's grinding waste. I've never been able to find out whether the rules actually applied. Good guideline, and a good, the 10 dB is a good idea, and the measurement I like.
it could apply. Typically, the Mass DEP will defer to local jurisdictions to enforce their own policy. But yes, the Mass DEP, it's a state policy. So if it's in this state and it's a stationary source,
Do you find very many communities have a sound standard or regulation?
there are quite a few in Massachusetts that have their own policy. Some of them simply mirror the state's policy, but it's their local policy as well.
Something we might want to think about.
Just by way of example, Shrewsbury has a performance standard in the industrial zone of sound at the property line, not increasing by 10 dB. But it's similar to the state, that's driven off of stationary activities, and not knowing enough about the grinding, I wouldn't want to venture a guess. What does happen in our world, so to speak, is some confusion about particularly truck traffic in some areas. That type of transient noise is not regulated by the DEP. It is a matter of concern, I guess, in some fashion, and needs to be mitigated. An example of the mitigation is the 12-foot sound wall. That will have no impact at all on the stationary units, which are on the roof and therefore 40x feet in the air. But they will mitigate any incidental sound from truck activities, whether that's trucks simply going around the building or coupling or uncoupling or backing up in some fashion. And it was added voluntarily by the applicant, basically to make sure that we'll have no serious impact to the neighborhood in Shrewsbury, which is better than 900 feet over. And I think it probably is worth showing the elevations, Ryan, to kind of walk through that.
Another thing I've wondered about is, you mentioned, noise emitting characteristics of the machinery, like on the roof. What happens, what control will there be that you don't replace the machinery with noisy machinery after all this permitting, or, 5 years from now. There's probably no control, except maybe DEP.
But, I think that control can be drafted as an appropriate condition. That, it's based upon a certain type of unit that is in the specs, so to speak, right
Okay.
now. We can create parameters that would be basically the baseline for future, if necessary.
Take note, Fiona. And then the last thing is, I didn't fully capture what you were saying or may have said about backup beepers. We hear a lot of complaints about that. We're concerns that if we allow something, that's gonna be a problem. What's the handling of that in this case?
So our study included predictions of potential impacts from backup beepers, and they are presented in our report. I believe the highest predicted value at a location in Grafton was in the low 50s. So they would be audible if they were in that worst case scenario. But again, those are not regulated sources. Those are, an OSHA safety requirement to have backup alarms. But we have presented what those values would be and quantified them in our report.
And then the bottom line is, okay, it's on that slide. When you get all done, your increases over ambient range from 1 to 9 dB, which is really, it's less, 1 is less than 10 and 9 is less than 10. So.
Right, and actually the largest increase at a Grafton location is, I believe, 6. So that 1 to 9 is project-wide basis, but to the closest locations to the south, it's an increase of 6. But again, that 6 is calculated from using the quietest ambient levels in the middle of the night, and then the conservative model to come up with that value.
I really like all of that measurement. I used to work for someone long ago who did acoustic work. I think about, wind blowing over the microphone and, transients and whatnot. And that sounds like a pretty good coverage of what you're trying to do, what we need to do. Okay, I'm happy.
Justin, you have anything?
Nothing really special on the sound, no.
Did someone say that the peer reviewers are here as well? Are you able to just confirm that, we get this kind of flow of different letters, but are you able to just confirm that all your concerns were addressed in the back and forth and, kind of where you stand?
Yeah, do I need to formally introduce myself? Or
Please.
yeah. Okay. Hello, my name is Zachary Weiss. I work for Noise Control Engineering. We were hired on behalf of the town to peer review the report. All of our concerns have been addressed through the peer review process. I can give an overview of how that process went, if that's helpful. Okay, so basically, we first reviewed the report, read through the whole thing, but we were mostly focused on were the noise measurements conducted appropriately, and was an ambient level determined, a background level determined properly. Does the input into the noise model all make sense, and is it consistent? And then does the output of the results make sense and are consistent? Spoiler is that we are happy on that regard after going through the whole peer review process, and we don't have any concerns about the report. We very clearly said in our last peer review that we are confident that it was conducted conservatively and comprehensively. After our first review, primarily our concern in drafting our questions and comments was that we wanted additional information. This is stuff that doesn't need to even be in the first version of a report. It's just, as a reviewing consultant, I would like to look at this material. So we asked For the noise measurements, we wanted just a little more information on what sound sources were present while the noise measurements were being taken. But we really didn't have any concerns from our initial review on the noise measurements. Epsilon took not just took like quite a few more locations than most consultants would take, but they measured wind speed and rainfall on site, which is the best way you can do that to exclude hours that should not be included in the measurements, where the measurement is unduly influenced by rainfall or by wind-induced noise on the microphone. So yeah, we didn't really have any concerns on either that or the post-processing of the measurements. I believe their calculation method was to take the quietest hour of each night, which produces an appropriately conservative overall background level to be using as like a quietest reference for that 10 dB increase. In terms of input into the noise model, our main question was we just wanted to review what information was available from manufacturers. So the first revision of the report did not have the appendix that is now in the current revision that has like all of the rooftop equipment from the manufacturer showing these are the sound power levels. We checked all of those numbers and we made sure they all matched up. I think we found like one quibble, which is in our second review, but that's really like, it is very hard to imagine that affecting any of the final presented results. So we don't really have a concern with that. And then we also reviewed all of those levels of the input just to make sure they made sense to us and were in the general range of where we expected. Any consultant you go to will model truck, if they model truck noise at all for a report like this, they'll model different types of sources and in different ways. We found that all of the levels that were presented, we liked the approach of the 5 different types of truck events in all the different locations. Found it more comprehensive than we've seen in other peer reviews. And we thought the levels were just right around the same range we've seen when in other reports for this nature. And then for the output, the predicted results from the report, we went through all the numbers in the appendix. We made sure any numbers that should add up and form other numbers presented did do that, and we found no mistakes in that regard. So all of the numbers in the appendix are all self-consistent with each other. We also looked around at the location of the different receptors to make sure that different trends made sense of, in terms of, particularly on the north side of the project, we had a few questions of, okay, why is this receptor lower than this receptor when it's actually closer? So most of our questions focused on the results of the model were just on asking for a little more information on helping us understand why those results would vary. Epsilon's already spoken to the ultimate cause of that, which is just the topography north of the project site. We wanted to understand also why what the benefit of the barrier was, and we felt that was addressed really well. Yeah, we are happy. After those questions, we are confident that, okay, the trends we're seeing in the presented results do make sense with the information we have available. Now, just to be clear, what's not part of the peer review process is we did not go take our own measurements, we did not do a site visit, and we did not do our own noise model of all the sources, but it's out of the scope of the thing. We're reviewing the processes and making sure it was done to a certain professional standard. Yeah, I guess we also, in terms of truck noise, we asked a specific question about the backup beepers. We are not objecting to to applying mass DEP to stationary sources and not as explicitly to the truck sources, but we did think it would be useful for informational purposes to know if we were to take the tonal criteria from mass DEP and apply it to the truck sources, would we have any excesses? And that's addressed in the responses to our first comments, where I believe there would be a few cases where mass DEP would interpret not a level excess, but a tonal excess. That's we wanted that available for informational purposes. In terms of what you do with that would be up to you. Anyway, yeah. So we were ultimately very happy with the standard the report was conducted to, and yeah, we are very comfortable saying it was comprehensive and conservative.
Does Shrewsbury have a peer review of, I assume it's the same information,
It's the same company.
it's the same,
They did.
Yeah,
But-
it was the same peer review.
Was
We
it
just
the same-
submitted
it was-
the same review to both towns.
the same, okay, so they'll have exactly what you've told us.
Yeah, a colleague of mine was at the Shrewsbury meeting, so it's a different person here. But
We have enough meetings, I'll let Shrewsbury,
yeah.
okay, thank you.
Anything else from any of you?
Thank you.
Prabhu, did you have anything?
I'm good, Dave.
Okay, any other last questions about the sound study?
Sound study, no.
Okay, well, thank you. I think you've,
Turning to other subjects, maybe just to summarize where we are. We had, one of the first meetings was to review the site design, the stormwater, and the civil engineering. As you know, Graves Engineering has reviewed that, provided comment letters. There's been back and forth on those that happened as recently as last week. Mr. Perry's here and can describe it in more detail, but I would characterize it as the most minor of engineering type of changes that simply need to be noted on the plan. There doesn't seem to be any real disagreement amongst the engineers, and therefore the plans will be modified appropriately as indicated by by Mr. Perry's last correspondence of September 27th. We separately reviewed the photometric plan as far as the lighting, the landscaping plan, and some of the architecture. We haven't received any feedback from either community on that, and so unless there's particular questions or concerns of either staff or the board, we don't have any other information to submit with regard to that. Traffic, we had an opportunity to meet with both Shrewsbury and you, and went through a detailed review with MDM Transportation. The board pushed back a little bit with regard to the proportionality of the contribution. Those are fair points. We've gone back and given it some consideration. We've developed an alternative, but that alternative is still awaiting MassDOT blessing in some fashion. We're not prepared to basically get too far over our skis until MassDOT says that the nature of the work that's going to be done in the intersection and therefore paid for, this applies much more in Shrewsbury than Grafton, obviously, and paid for by the applicant is actually something that they're going to support. So we're trying to get that done. We were hopeful we'd have it done by now, but we certainly anticipate that we can have it done for a future meeting. One item I'd like to drill down on and get some direction from the board is related to parking. Parking is a little complicated in this because you've got two different communities with two different standards. So let me walk you through the numbers, and we'll certainly submit something in writing to support this. But looking at each of the size of the building in each respective community, Shrewsbury's requirement is one parking space per 1,500 square feet, and Grafton's is one parking space per 750 square feet. If you look at that on the weighted average of how much of the building is in each side, there is a consensus that what is required is 870 parking spaces, or 970 parking spaces, pardon me. On the plan as submitted to be constructed, what is shown is 830 parking spaces, which is more than enough to meet the Shrewsbury requirement, but is short by your requirements. And therefore, part of our request is for a relief under the site plan review under section 4.2.5.2 to allow us to have reserve parking. And the plan shows that reserve parking. I don't know if we're able to pull it up in any fashion so you can see it.
I sent it to Natalia and Fiona.
Okay. I don't know if Fiona can pull it up or not, so,
Yes, I think Hannah sent something that I will share.
great. Sean and Hannah, maybe once we've got it, you can actually show the board on this screen where it is, as opposed to me trying to point up there in some fashion.
Sure, yeah. So it's, yeah, I'll point up here for, in a few places, and, so the majority of the reserve parking, and it's shown in the plans, and it has been, all along, is kind of lighter in color, this gray area where, in the, I guess, northernmost portion of the lot, and then also in the southernmost portion of the parking lot, which is, this is the area that was majority in Grafton here as well. So altogether, there's a few, like you can see a couple here in that area, so there's a few others scattered around. All said and done, there's 140 reserved parking spaces called out on the plans to get to that total of 970.
It's worth noting that the plan shows other parking. It shows exterior truck parking.
Mr. Donahue, just real quick, I'm sorry for interrupting. Your associate just said 970 to get to the total of it instead of, I believe that's 870. I just wanted to verify the number that we're talking about.
The required is 970.
Okay.
The provided to be built is 830.
Okay.
Leaving the gap of 140.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Always check my math. The truck parking is significant. There is 789 exterior truck parking spaces. So trucks are taken care of in that fashion. There's also 372 interior parking spaces for the delivery vans, the vans that you see in your neighborhood on a regular basis. So the parking that we're talking about is clearly just the passenger vehicles and not being used for other purposes in some fashion. You have authority under your bylaw, as we read it, to grant allowance for those reserved spaces. They fall well under the 30% that you're limited to. Some of your requirement to be able to do that is that there's a reason for the decrease. And I think here is in particular good reason for the decrease, because unlike some cases in which you're not quite sure how a building is going to be used, we know how this building is going to be used. It's going to be used by United Parcel Service, which has similar type facilities throughout the country and has done detailed studies of how that parking gets used so that they're not paying for either construction or maintenance of parking that they don't need. The way their operation works, particularly here, works with that. I think we may all have kind of a sense, because some of us had the benefit of actually doing it, of, particularly at peak time, a lot of extra people showing up to move packages and the like. This building, because of the status of its automation, really can produce only what it can produce, because it's the machinery that produces it in some fashion. And therefore, the throughput of the facility is not increased by the number of people there. It's simply increased by the speed of the equipment in some fashion, if you think of it that way. There is a careful effort by UPS to stagger shifts so as to provide adequate time. On a regular basis, there are 4-hour shifts. Those can be, under some cases, shortened to 3.5 hours, but not less than that in some fashion. So that allows adequate time between shifts for basically some diminishment of traffic as people leave the shift and people to come in some fashion. All the while the 360 vehicles that are basically delivery vehicles, those drivers obviously come here every day, and those vehicles are there from approximately 9 a.m. till 7 p.m. During the course. So the UPS is very confident that the parking is more than adequate to meet its particular needs. And I think that particularly the lack of any detrimental impact, if for some reason they need additional parking, the reserve is there. It still falls well within the design as to the location of it. As Mr. Perry indicated, the work's already been done to include it in the stormwater calculations as if it's impervious now, so it wouldn't require any particular changes in any fashion. And therefore, we don't think that there's any detrimental impact upon allowing the reserved spaces, and would look for the board to, respectfully, grant that decrease in the number of parking spaces. I raise it now because if the board's not amenable to it, we want to revise the plans to show what we're going to actually build in some fashion. So, if we can get some indication as to whether that's acceptable to the board, As I said, I can submit this in a narrative fashion for the record, so there's no question about how we get to the counts.
Let me ask Fiona, from your perspective, where are we at with the parking?
So we have been meeting with the applicant a few times about this topic. The issue is that the building inspector's determination of the calculation, she doesn't agree with the number proposed. I mean, we've presented a couple of different options. We understand, significantly revising the plans and also going through potentially another full permit process would be challenging, but I think we're trying to work together to figure this out. I mean, we were corresponding as even today, and I guess I would like to ask. I'm trying to pull it up on my separate device here because I'm sharing my screen. But Mark, if you could just clarify for me, using the trucks, the intention is not to use any of the truck spaces to count toward the reserve parking, or is that what is being proposed?
No, the reserve parking, correct me if I'm wrong, John, but is all passenger vehicles and is proximate to existing vehicles. Correct. So
Okay.
it is not basically relining areas that are shown for truck. It would be additional parking for passenger vehicles.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I think I would like the justification, a basic summary of what Mark said. I think it's helpful context to have, and would be very helpful for the board when they're trying to make this decision because of the operation of the facility and the peak parking times, and just understanding how the employees flow through. And if if UPS is stating that it's technically over parked based on their calculations, I think that there might be some ability to look at the requirements of the reserve parking and have the board make a decision based on that criteria. But we just need that additional information. That's just, I don't want to speak for the board, but I think it's hard for the board to make a decision if we're hearing, obviously one thing about how it's sufficient, and then but it does kind of contradict what is in our bylaw. So we're trying to work together on this essentially. So I think that additional context would be good, and definitely something for the record would be needed.
Sure, we'll be glad to put together a narrative that explains how the parking is provided on the plan and how it meets the 5-point criteria of 5.2.5.2.1 of your zoning bylaw. So we'll have you that within the week. So
Fiona, did the building inspector give any additional detail on what the concerns are?
Yes, so the building inspector, the way that she's strictly sticking to the table 4.2.2 in the bylaw. So one space per 750 square feet for what does it say here? Roughly 608,000 square foot portion of the building in Grafton. So, and there was some back and forth about what the definition of a parking space entails, and if it doesn't differentiate between if a car could park there and a truck, but her interpretation of the bylaw is they have to be separate, and I agree with her, and I think that's something that we were trying to work toward. But just looking at this from a basic section 4.2.2, it doesn't say anywhere, and even outside of that table, that you can use a weighted average.
And what about the actual effects? So say the parking's insufficient, is there any elaboration on what might happen? People are parking off site, or, kind of what happens if it's insufficient?
So we haven't had, Tracy and I haven't connected about that specifically, that we don't have concerns about people parking off site. Just because, I think it hasn't come up. I don't want to, I guess I shouldn't say that. I don't want to assume that people are not going to do it, but you know, based on the complexity of this site, and the limited space where employee parking spaces are, yeah, the applicant is saying like this is really the configuration, but I do not see, nor did Graves Engineering, nor did our traffic peer review team see issues with this configuration.
And then one just quick question for the applicant. With the reserve parking, is the idea that the regular parking spaces are paved, and then if they are needed, then you would pave them, or it's already ready to go in a paved area?
It will not be paved to start. In fact, it'll be graded out. It'll be ready to go, and if it's determined either by the applicant or you have power, the building inspector has power under your bylaw to require it, then you'd have to come in and just create the curbing and
Okay.
be able to pave it right over. I don't, just one point. I recognize that this is a hard site because the bylaw doesn't really deal with properties of 200 acres that split the town line. So you got to come up with something to make sense. The universe of things that make sense, though, are kind of limited. It's either how much of the building is in each one because it's different, or you apply one town's requirements to the entirety of the building and you try to figure out who trumps the other side, you know? And that's got the dramatic difference, because if you had to use the Grafton standard for the entirety of the building, we'd be building 1,127 parking spaces for a user who knows 830 is enough. That just doesn't make a whole lot of sense for a lot of reasons. It would make as much sense to go the other way, which is use the Shrewsbury standard for the entire building, and then we're in compliance because that's only 564. So the weighted average is kind of the compromise in some fashion to try to get there. And I think once we get to an agreement as to how many spaces we need, then I think the rest of it can fall into place once we kind of do the count. But we'll lay it all out in a letter.
Yeah, anything else, Greg?
No, that's all.
Justin?
So I'll kind of take a few thoughts of this. Number one, before the actual formal submission for this project that came to us, the initial, years back initial kind of sketch of the plan was that pretty much the whole building was going to be in Grafton. So it would have had to follow our parking plan if it was that way.
Yeah.
That's not in front of us today. So that's not what I'm
Right.
too focused on. But the thought to me is, number one, Fiona, I think it would be really beneficial if we can get a written account of what the building inspector's opinion is on this into our record, at least before we do any sort of formal vote on this, so we can have that in there. My initial feeling is, I believe I agree with your vocal reasoning for the reserve parking myself. That said, I'm also very sensitive to the building inspector's opinion as far as representing the town and that and the like. So I would lean toward voting based on what the building inspector's opinion is. Just to, if you can work that out, that'd be
Sure.
the best. But
Sure.
the additional point I have on this is, it's not news to you because it was mentioned in Graves' review. The retention basin that is where that actually reserves parking is, that would become a subsurface one. I have concerns to myself about taking one design of a retention basin and changing it to add reserve parking in the whatever time frame that we would need to, if the building inspector or us say you'll need the parking. That said, I know you closed with Conservation Commission, and I would generally defer to Conservation Commission's opinion on detention basin, situations. So I am interested if they've made any comments to you at the more recent hearings with them, and what your read of what they were saying on that particular point, if they've mentioned it at all.
Through the chair, let me answer it two ways. We have closed, and the Conservation Commission has voted unanimously to grant the 3 permits that were before them. The state wetland permit, the local wetland permit, the stormwater permit. With regard to whether there are any comments, I'm going to defer really to Mr. Perry, who was more active as far as that was concerned, and also talk a little bit just about the impact of, if we had to go that direction, what it would be the change. So, John?
I don't have a whole lot.
You gotta be near a mic.
Yeah, I can switch to the one, right? There you go. Get you out of the hot seat. I don't have a whole lot more to add, I think, than what Mark mentioned, that we have been before the Conservation Commission. We reviewed the plan, the stormwater, did discuss the reserve parking area, because it did come up in the Graves, comment memorandum, as you mentioned before.
Yes.
And we did discuss that if we did need to build that area of parking, it would become a subsurface system. There wasn't a whole lot of discussion on it, to be honest with you. So we would design a system that has the same volume and infiltration capabilities as the above ground basin.
What kind of timeline does needing to change it from the existing plan if the parking wasn't built to changing it to a subsurface thing plus how much extra time is that on top of just changing the parking itself, roughly?
To construct it
To
for
construct it to
construction?
be subsurface compared to non-subsurface.
I don't know. I'm prepared to talk about construction timelines. Probably would need a contractor to
Yeah.
weigh in there. I don't want to shoot from the hip too much.
My question on that is just roughly if the building inspector says, say this was built today, and building inspector said tomorrow, look, you guys need to have more parking. You're using more of it for the holiday season. Now you need to build that parking out, but because you have to change that basin over to subsurface compared to today, it's a little bit of a different timeline than we usually see with regards to utilizing reserve parking. I'm just curious of what that looks like from a practicality standpoint.
I think there's a lot of conjecture in there, because if the building inspector, as your bylaw provides, the building inspector can require that either all or a portion of it be built.
Yes.
So it kind of depends on what the problem is that we're trying to solve and coming up with a solution. It could be a hybrid in which it's a different type of basin for,
Yep.
in some fashion, and then we'd have to come back and modify the plan if we're gonna have to do that,
Okay.
I think in having a discussion with the building inspector as to the concerns will give us some insight as to whether it frankly should just get built to take the risk off, because it's going to be cheaper to do it while you're mobilized and just get it done while you're out there. I would add that this was a matter that was discussed pre-filing, but that's not really fair because your present building inspector wasn't the building inspector then. And your past building inspector didn't leave anything in writing, so that puts the present building inspector in kind of a hard spot, which we understand. We have talked about it in Shrewsbury. It's been the concept has been accepted in Shrewsbury, so we'll follow up as suggested with the building inspector first. We'll get you a letter of justification. We'll make sure that we're addressing in that justification your precise determination on parking.
Yep.
And get it all cleared up for you within the month.
Yeah, so one of the points at issue here is the top line total number of parking spaces based on square footage.
Right.
Whereas, just to make sure I'm clear on that applying the Grafton standard to the entire footprint of the building produces a requirement for something over 1,100 parking spaces. With the weighted average approach, you're at 970. I remember the numbers right?
Yeah, the Grafton portion is 811.
And then, so that sort of drives the rest of it is how much actual parking and how much reserve parking. And generally speaking, the board in the past has been, been favorable to setting aside a certain amount of parking as reserve parking, where to the extent that it makes sense. So I don't have an issue with that part of it. It's just more a question of the total number of spaces, depending on how you do the calculation, and that seems to be a topic of that's not fully resolved quite yet.
Bob. Yeah. Until I see a clear, complete discussion of who is saying what and who is pushing where and all of that, I have no idea what this back and forth is, what the numbers are. So it's hard to say, maybe there's something there that I'm gonna worry about. But as Dave says, I think, in a number of cases where there was not even this much, justification, that, our boards going back have, been fairly favorable to the reserve parking idea. And one of the stronger points here for me is on this site is pretty well isolated. What happens if you don't have enough parking spaces? You're gonna have to, you're not gonna have you shouldn't have your people parking out on the Centec roads and hiking into the building, or out on, what is it, Centec Route, the Shrewsbury, parking out there, or along, that's really up to you, your problem. So I don't feel real worried, but I reserve until I actually understand what the argument is.
We'll straighten it up.
And I'll just briefly add, that's my reason for saying as well, I didn't really have an issue with the reserve parking. And my points about the detention basin, the Conservation Commission approving it as is drafted today, I don't have any reasons I would say no because of that alone. I just wanted to be clear on that point.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? So it sounds to me like at this point, we're zeroing in on something, and really where we go from here depends on sort of nailing down what those parking numbers need to be.
Yep.
That's a matter of, at this point, it sounds like there may still be some differences of opinion between the town, the building inspector in particular, and you guys, but it sounds like we have a reasonable expectation of getting that resolved shortly. Not tonight, obviously, but I mean, our next meeting, our first opportunity to continue this hearing would be 3 weeks from tonight, and I would like to think that 3 weeks ought to be enough time to nail that down.
Certainly enough for this. Yep.
And the only other thing that I remember hearing from earlier in the discussion tonight, where there's still, the traffic mitigation numbers have not been nailed down yet because you're waiting on Mass DOT.
Right.
And
I do have,
other than that, are there other open issues?
I do have one comment to bring back up regarding traffic a little bit. So there was discussion about not restricting truck traffic taking the right turn into Grafton from the truck exit of this property, because they would most likely go down Route 20, of course. The concern to me is if we don't put a sign saying no right turns or put something in there to restrict that, there are people that may use a GPS because maybe Route 20 is a little bit busy and go into Grafton, because heading into Grafton you get into those intersections that are pretty far from the site, not necessarily useful for a traffic report, but are problematic turns for trucks to take, the big tractor trailers, etc., like on 2 Bridge Street in Grafton, and at the corner of East Street, over the one where the Upton Railroad crosses right there. And
East Street.
Thank you. East. I was trying to lose my mind on names, but that little turn to head up to
Right.
back up to 20 the other direction, or
And when you're talking about trucks, you're talking about the articulated 53-foot
yes,
tractor trailers.
I'm not talking about the little box trucks that do regular deliveries. I'm
Okay.
just talking about the big trucks.
I do recall that the traffic report estimated that roughly 30% of the truck traffic would be heading into Grafton from the site.
Yeah.
I don't know I don't remember whether that distinguished between the two types of trucks, the package cars or the tractor trailers, but I mean, there was, the traffic, did estimate that some of the truck traffic would be flowing through Grafton.
No, it did. It's a fair point, Mr. Wood. Thank you for raising it. We'll get it answered before we come back on the 20th.
Right, thank you.
Because you should be producing, I would expect, it looks like you're gonna be doing last mile delivery like is done from Shrewsbury, from this site.
Yes.
So, we're last mile.
Yeah, I'm not as worried about last mile from my point. I'm not worried about the last mile deliveries that we'll be heading out for this particular point, but it's the bigger trucks that I was worried about making those.
Well,
turns.
but the people along the roads
Oh, yes.
will be seeing traffic, and particularly the intersection in North Grafton at 30 and 140 is already very troublesome. So, really would like not to see big trucks there,
No.
the articulated trucks.
Point well taken. We'll go back and discuss it with MDM and UPS.
There's that. Of course, if you could widen the bridge over the what is that, the Quinsigamon?
Yes.
A little, like a couple lanes, then things would get better.
There are a few mitigations that
Yeah, man, that would fix it right
conceivable
up.
there. Maybe
I mean,
not practical, but
That's one of the places that we regularly have.
You've always been
Getting
very
into
liberal
trouble.
with an applicant's budget, Mr. Anthony.
Yeah. Oh well.
all right.
Maybe more signs that say, "Don't."
You really don't want to take your tractor trailer this way. You're just asking for trouble if you do that.
You know how much
That works so well in
how much good that does in Westboro, where the railroad, where they go under the railroad.
Yeah, at least we don't have that situation. Anyway, so is there anything else? I think it sounds like we're at a point where there's just a couple things remaining to be nailed down, and a continuation might be in order.
Sure.
Anything else from the
Yes,
board or
for
anybody?
November 28th, if you have time on your calendar.
Yes.
November.
October 28th.
October 28th. So. Justin will bring around the paperwork, and I think the chair here would be pleased to recognize a motion to grant the applicant's written request to continue this hearing to Monday of October. You almost got me saying October 28th at 7:30 p.m.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Wood.
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger.
Aye.
Mr. Venkatraman.
Prabhu?
Prabhu.
Sorry, 1 second.
And Mr. Robbins votes aye.
Aye. Dave.
Excellent. Motion carried by a vote unanimously. This hearing is continued 3 weeks from tonight, and if all goes well, sounds like we might be wrapping it up.
Thank
So
you for your time this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's nothing more for us, is there? I move we adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded that this meeting be adjourned. Mr. Wood.
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger.
Aye.
Mr. Venkatraman.
Aye.
And Mr. Robbins votes aye. Motion carried unanimously. We are adjourned.